This is Snakes Chat on 91.5 WDBK. I'm with Eric Reese. Eric, tell us what your writing publications are. Like, who do you write for?
So currently, I'm writing for two. Most of the time, it's Philly Sports Network, Philadelphia Flyers writing team, Philadelphia Wings content when the NLL season begins. That'll be in April. And the other publication I'm currently writing for is the Kraken Chronicle. So that's through FanSided for the Seattle Kraken. They'll be a team they'll take to the ice next year, 2021-2022 NHL season.
Okay, cool. How is covering the Seattle Kraken been?
Yeah, covering the Seattle Kraken, it's been a challenge. It's kind of, you're always following these, every other team across the league, and that's basically how we're putting out content right now. Everything's very heavily indicating towards the expansion draft. So it's a challenge when you don't exactly have a team that's playing on the ice because you don't really know what players you have. So a lot of it, even I find myself kind of crossing over a lot of my Flyers content. So when James Van Riemsdyk or Shane Gostisbehere or even Nolan Patrick on his return this season, a lot of that content that I'll also be writing for Philly Sports Network will also kind of translate over to the Kraken Chronicle, because all of a sudden those players' stock have absolutely risen as a player that the Kraken could draft in the expansion draft. And not all those players are going to be protected, especially ones that are that cost nearly $8 million or $5 million on your salary cap.
Yeah, and the Flyers are not too good on the salary cap, right? Am I pretty close?
Yeah, they've cut it close for especially the last few seasons. I think Chuck Fletcher has kind of gotten us out of that salary cap purgatory. Looking at the 2020 offseason, you had Matt Niskanen retire, and you still had players like James Van Riemsdyk, just like Shane Gostisbehere, who were going to be, costing a pretty penny for what their value was. And on top of those players that you still have to find room to extend contracts for players like Phil Myers, who it took a long time to get Phil Myers' contract done. It had me sweating a little bit. But with players like Justin Braun or an Eric Gustafson that were brought onto the team this year, I think if I was dissecting those, a lot of those were kind of like allergic reactions to the untimely retirement of Matt Niskanen. So it had a lot to do with, hey, is this going to be a value pickup for what we have left on our salary cap? And looking at Justin Braun, I was ready to bring up, like, as somebody who's watching and kind of dissecting the content and the performances of the team last year, I was ready to move forward with Mark Friedman, just from the get-go. I really don't think that Justin Braun was really necessary to extend. I was kind of, ready to move on from him. And the moment that we signed Eric Gustafson to, $3 million, it was alarming, because we're ready to trade Shane Gostisbehere, and Shane Gostisbehere, quite frankly, is the better hockey player. So it's a tricky question to kind of answer, how are we doing in salary cap? There's been very smart signings that say, hey, it's worth it for the salary cap. There's also been a few signings where we could have probably shaved off, another almost $5 million. So it's better than what it was when Dave Haxtell was the coach, and when when Ron Hextall was the general manager. He had a lot of great things going on with the prospects and building the team from the inside out. And I think he was a great GM. I'll die on that hill. But I think Chuck Fletcher, for the most part, has done a pretty good job. It's just we're still close to that salary cap.
Yeah, he built that. He built that roster up on Hextall, but was the obviously like the Matt Niskanen retirement was shocking for all of us. Was that the plan for the Flyers to before they found out that he retired? Was there a plan to get a pure goal scorer?
I think
team?
Part of the plan was, to me, I don't know, how do you really go about planning anything for a retirement that kind of came out of thin air? I mean, Niskanen still had years on his contract that he originally signed, so it took everybody by surprise. And he cited bubble hockey and the pandemic as part of the reason why he decided to retire, which makes absolute sense. And I'll never sit there and say, "Oh, why did you retire because of the pandemic?" It makes all the sense in the world. It's a risk just to step onto the ice before you have a puck shot at you, which is already crazy in itself. So as far as there being a plan, once Niskanen's gone, I thought the plan would have easily been, hey, we're going to have Shane Gostisbehere be the top guy. To me, that just made sense from the beginning, because if you look back to the 2020 Eastern Conference semifinals, where the Flyers against the Montreal Canadiens, Niskanen actually was suspended, and Gostisbehere played on the top line with Provorov. So you immediately had to look to your roster that you already have and say which one is going to step up and which one fits where. Myers, I thought also was a great idea as far as, hey, let's put him on the top pair. That's a consideration. But Gostisbehere, I think, was the devil in that scenario. And it's just been a crazy, crazy start for the season for Gostisbehere. This is a player who was actively and openly on the trade block. And then training camp starts, and he has a few conversations with Alain Vigneault. And next thing you know, it's like a clean slate, and he's on the top pair with Provorov. Then you get days before puck drop on the first Penguins game, and he's unavailable because of the COVID protocol. So you're now, and like the defense has been completely incomplete this entire season so far. You're missing players here and there.
I got some numbers. I want to go across later in the show, but before the season even started last season, we had trouble defensive wise. Of course, Matt Niskanen brought that defense up to par. The defense was better last year versus this year. What were your expectations heading into this season like?
This season, I thought that since the team didn't really change too much, that we still had a good team. I mean, every single thing that the Flyers did last year, getting all the way to the Eastern Conference semifinals, Game 7 against the New York Islanders, you did that without Nolan Patrick, and you did it without Oscar Lindblom. For the most part. I mean, Oscar Lindblom you had for key wins through about 30 games in 2019, 2020, and then, of course, his diagnosis with the Ewing sarcoma. And he missed all of the season except probably the final 3 games of the playoffs, roughly, for the Flyers. So, yeah, going into the season, I thought that, the team was still quality. I look at the forwards. I don't think we lost anything. I thought, what we have, in fact, we gained 2 great players with Lindblom being cleared to play and then Nolan Patrick being cleared. Defensively, I thought was always the big question mark, and mostly because of what we talked about with Niskanen retiring. I saw the Eric Gustafsson signing as this is a power play specialist only, and he proved that in the first 2 games. But then he's kind of proved the only part over the past 4 games, where he's only a power play guy. Defensively, there's many things to be desired. I mean, it's just, I think that goes without saying almost, especially when you look at the game last night when the Flyers take on the Devils and he's not in the lineup and Gostisbehere is. You're looking at who can play defense and who can really limit the transition for 3-on-2s and 2-on-1s that really has eaten Carter Hart alive this season. So defensively, that was a big question mark. I think once the team is healthy and you have the real plan that you had at the beginning of 2021 was Myers being on the ice and Gostisbehere being on the ice. You get to have that happen. So defensively, we just don't know what we have yet. I think we weren't as strong as we were last year on the defensive side of puck. But goaltending wise, it's kind of shocking to see Carter Hart struggle. But at the same time, it's not really, I don't think, on him and his goaltending performance. I think that more times than not, he's been put in a bad scenario with these odd man rushes that the defense is giving up. A lot of that also has to do with forechecking schemes, but that's on the very technical side of things. But I really liked bringing back Brian Elliott, and I will die also on this grave that Brian Elliott is the best insurance policy in the league when it comes to a backup goaltender.
Yeah, the Shane Gostisbehere is a unique player. He hasn't played very well the last, wasn't it 3 seasons? Like his first year he went off, and then since then he hasn't been consistently staying in the lineup. Like the way you were talking about him just now, do you see him not being selected by the Seattle Kraken? So let me rephrase that. Who do you see the Seattle Kraken drafting out of these Flyers players?
I would say depends where they want to go, if it's defense or forwards. I don't think a goaltender is going to be selected from us. I mean, clearly Carter Hart's going to be protected, so he's not going to be, he's not on the table. Brian Elliott, I think there's going to be better goaltenders out there for a franchise that's building from scratch to select. So I think Brian Elliott's in the clear as even a backup goaltender. I mean, so that leaves really 2 defensemen and probably 3 forwards, and it all depends on who's protected. At the beginning of the season, I didn't have Nolan Patrick protected, but it's because a lot of his 1-year prove-it deal is a gamble based on his health. And also, I think in the same sort of sample size that you've seen a lot more from guys like Oscar Lindblom. I think he'll be protected. If I had to give probably 3 players or 4 players, Van Riemsdyk's out there. He's available, but is it going to be? It's going to be a question of if Ron Francis and the Seattle Kraken want to take on his contract, and that's probably going to be something that says, "Hey, you guys can keep James Van Riemsdyk. We'll take a player like Scott Laughton." And Scott Laughton's another player where he's proven last year that he can break some games wide open. He's a great bottom 6 forward. You have also on the defensive side of puck, like Robert Hagg won't be protected, but he's a young defenseman and he's a physical defenseman. And I think that he would thrive really on any team. You could also consider a lot of it's going to come back around to depth for the forwards. So I don't think Michael Raffl's a bad pick, but if you lose Michael Raffl, then you're really, in my opinion, you're not losing much. the Flyers are so deep with forwards, you're not really losing much on the end. Where if even if they took Scott Laughton, you're not really losing much. Defensively, I think if they really wanted to hurt the Flyers where it counts, if you take Robert Hagg, that's probably the more valuable player that could be exposed to the Kraken. It's a tough pick. I honestly, out of those players, I think I would draft Scott Laughton. He's not expensive, and he's proven he can be very valuable in the bottom six.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I agree with your analogy. The one player I think they should that the Flyers should somewhat move on from after the season is Jake Voracek.
I think you have some people who would agree with you on that, but I would disagree. But no, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, because he's not a goal scorer that he once was. Yeah, with the Flyers, he's a guy who's a playmaker. Like he finds open space, and then he passes that, and then he like turns over the puck like a lot of times. Last night he turned over a puck, I believe, and Shane Gostisbehere turned over a puck last night. But the Flyers played really, really well yesterday against the Devils. The last 4 games they didn't play well before they played the Devils. But let's backtrack and with the goals scoring, do you think the Flyers stayed quiet this offseason because they thought, hey, like Nolan Patrick is coming back, for Lindblom is coming back? Do you think they believe that those two guys could become a elite or a pure goal scorer? I know you said you didn't at the beginning. You didn't attack Nolan Patrick, but what do you think they believe with their players?
I believe that Alain Vigneault definitely looks at Oscar Lindblom and Nolan Patrick as very valuable assets to the team. I believe that Lindblom could be one of the premier goal scorers for over the next decade for the Flyers if he, wants to stay in Philadelphia throughout his career. When I look at the lack of moves for forwards during the offseason, I think a lot of it was predicated on we're planning to have Patrick return. We're planning to have Lindblom return. So how much do we really need to invest in other players coming in here when I think what took precedence was Matt Niskanen's retirement and, we need to address this defense. Even the smaller moves to the AHL, Derek Poirier, he came from out of free agency and signed a two-way contract. So he was a former, I believe he's a first-round pick. He's a former top 10 pick when he was drafted. He is somebody that could have potential, or maybe his potential has sailed away, but he's a good hand that at least carry on the taxi squad, and he was already on the taxi squad this season. I think when Chuck Fletcher said, to himself, I'm going to look around and make some moves, but we're not going to do anything that's uncharacteristic. I think he just wanted to sit there and address what has gone, what he needs to bring in. And unfortunately, that didn't mean bringing in forwards. That meant bringing in defensemen. The forwards, I think, is a unit that is very tight in the locker room. There's tons of great chemistry there. It's almost along the lines of it's not broke, so let's not try to fix it. And I think that could play into a reason as to why no trades even were made for any other forwards. I mean, we just saw a blockbuster trade between the Winnipeg Jets and the Columbus Blue Jackets, sending
Yeah, I did see that.
Pierre-Luc
Yeah.
Dubois over to Winnipeg, and then the package deal sending Patrick Laine over to Columbus. Both of those players were players that the Flyers could have absolutely made a play for. I, for
Was
the
it
most
part
part,
of
was
it?
out on Laine from the beginning.
Okay. Was it part of like the reason why they didn't go for it is because of like the cap room?
I don't think it was really about the cap room. I think it was more so what these teams wanted. So early on, and I'll tell you this, and we'll go over like what the trade package was for Patrick Laine. But early on, the Winnipeg Jets, they wanted Travis Konechny, they wanted Ivan Provorov, and a pick for Patrick Laine. So see how quickly you're out on that, right? So considering what he was traded for, the Winnipeg Jets sent Laine and another decent player in Roslovic over to the Columbus Blue Jackets for Dubois and a pick. So you basically had two players who wanted out of their teams trade for each other and a pick. But to say that, hey, we want your best defenseman, we want your lead goal scorer, and a pick, that's literally, giving away the 3-car garage and the fridge for a player. Like it's too much, and I wouldn't have budged on it either. I don't need Laine in my life like that.
No. When they it involved Ivan Provorov and Travis Konechny, I'll be barely like taking out the phone, and when they say Ivan Provorov, I'm like, yeah, no.
I would have hung up so quickly. It would have made their head spin. Like I was more I would have been more eager to make a move directly for Pierre-Luc Dubois. He is a 22 or 23-year-old center who could be a superstar in the league. And quite frankly, I thought about this before, and now that what I saw what the trade was for, it would have been an overpay on the Flyers' part. But at one point, I kind of convinced myself. I was like, if Claude Giroux were to waive his no movement clause, we do have a guy that we can trade him for that's on the right side of the contract and age and has the skill for the next 10 years. It's almost like trading the Claude Giroux for a possible Claude Giroux. So I convinced myself to be the case there. And then as soon as the trade happened, I was like, wow, that was a horrible idea from me. So it's a good thing I'm not a GM.
Yeah, that's interesting because off the air, I was like, hey, what kind of trade package could potentially be for a guy like Nick Suzuki on Montreal? Like, I don't know what his type is. He could be similar to those lower end players. I don't know if he could be a pure goal scorer for us, but I don't know. That's what I was thinking. I was like, what if they trade for him? Could he become a goal scorer on our team, or what's not? But yeah, that's what I was thinking. But
as far as a Nick Suzuki, I was impressed by him during the postseason when the Flyers took on the Canadiens. I thought he developed into a Flyers killer of sorts.
Yeah, he's really tough in the Montreal's system and New York Islanders system. They're very very similar in terms of defense. That they get their defensemen tight in the zone, and we barely get by them in the zone, and it's very difficult for us to score on those kind of teams.
I think if you were going to, and just to kind of appease the trade package idea for Nick Suzuki, I I think you would have to begin with a player like Nolan Patrick. You're going to have to begin with a center who can play on the top 6 of the team, because that's where Suzuki's value is. So starting at Nolan Patrick, I think that's close to even already. I don't think you have to sweeten the deal that much more. So you're maybe sending a pick just to kind of secure the bag if you wanted Nick Suzuki for that. But I think based on what I'm able to see this season, I do like Suzuki. I think that Patrick still brings enough value to your lineup to kind of cancel out the idea of really needing Suzuki in Philadelphia. But if I was going to put a trade package together, I think you would have to start with the Suzuki. Or if you're looking at Montreal's team needs, you might have to combine it, a winger in there as well. I don't think that the Philadelphia Flyers would have the assets available to really help anybody who needs defense, because the Flyers need defense. So you're kind of stealing from your own pocket, where you kind of giving away money that you don't have to bail someone else out when you really need to be worried about yourself. So if there's anything that involves defense, if the Canadians wanted defense for Suzuki, I would be completely out on that trade package.
Yeah, and hopefully next season when Seattle comes in, they can hopefully take on some of the contracts that the Flyers are holding on. But the injuries. Let's talk about the injuries for a second. Morgan Frost got hurt. Sean Couturier got hurt. And Myers. Like how will the loss of those guys affect the Flyers in the long run against a tough division?
I have already looked at these last few games and said, wow, we miss Couturier like a lot. Not only just, I mean, it all kind of goes back to the just harping on the defense. Gostisbehere, I think, stabilized or helped stabilize a very unstable defensive unit last night. So, we still miss Myers on the second pair. But I think what you saw last night with the Flyers defense against the Devils was finally the right personnel. And I think they've went back to parts of last night, at least, not throughout the entire game. They went back to a 2-1-2 forecheck strategy, which is two forwards crashing the net on a defensive transition, one forward in the middle, two staying at home with defense. That really makes up for that really made a lot of defensive issues kind of come to life during the second period, as far as just kind of allowing the New Jersey Devils to kind of get back into the game, especially crashing down low on Brian Elliott. So what I like to see, and Vigneault kind of did this towards the end of the game, they went back to a 1-2-2 sort of forecheck, where you're just sending one forward towards the net on a defensive transition, and you're allowing the other forward to kind of play defense in the neutral zone and back in the defensive zone. So you're bringing a defensive first mentality. I think that's something that was called upon in the coaching strategies in the third period for the most part, because you're really seeing that they can't do a 2-1-2 without reigning Selke Trophy winner. And without a guy like Phil Myers, you're kind of counting on Mark Friedman to take a huge step forward. And in my opinion, I think he's earned a role on an every night lineup, but it's still not as stable with Friedman and Sanheim as you would normally have with Myers and Sanheim. And when I look at Morgan Frost as well, that's a guy that we were all rooting for. He had a great camp. I think he was the 13th forward that everybody was like, okay, even if one person goes down, we got Frost. And he did, when he was on the ice, he was one of the better skaters on the entire team, especially in a 6-1 loss to the Buffalo Sabres. And when he went down in that shutout victory, it definitely hurt because I think there's a specific kind of drop off between Frost and then you have like Bunneman. Like I think Bunneman he hustles, and that's something you're always going to see Bunneman do, and that's why he earns his time. But I think the skill level is just an upgrade if you have Frost in there. So missing him as a forward to come off the bench, so to speak, it's big. He provides an absolute spark for the team. But there's just some limitations, whether it's the forecheck schemes, whether it's defensive pairings that finally were able to kind of get right last night, and all that has to do with missing guys like Couturier, Myers, and even Frost.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. With the Jacob Voracek, he got called out by AV 3 weeks ago, I think. Was it 3 weeks ago? Or I don't know when it was.
He got called out by a reporter. He necessarily called out a reporter, I should say, based on previous kind of Voracek likes to go on Twitter and say, hey, he definitely will call out writers, and he's definitely done it before. And he had his first interaction with a certain writer from the Inquirer, and that one made its rounds as far as all the video is concerned. But yeah,
did he get
definitely that guy. Yeah.
Did he get fined?
Yes, he did. He did get fined for that. It's tough, right? So as you have two kind of aspects to look at that. As a hockey player, you probably do want to go off on media a lot more often like that. But as a media member like myself, okay, so it kind of comes from a couple things. Did you earn that? And the writer who he went off on, in my opinion, earned that. You can't just really bury the players that you cover. And I think that for too long now, Voracek has been on the receiving end of just some criticism that, quite frankly, isn't accurate. I mean, this season alone, I believe, during the last night's game when he notched that assist, he was leading the league as an assist, or tied for the league in assists. He's also a guy where over the past decade, he's been almost routinely a top 5 scorer on the team. And I see that kind of criticism that he gets where, he's not scoring enough goals. I'm like, well, okay, he's not scoring enough goals. He is creating goals though. And when you looked at the power play that was abysmal during the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs, Voracek was pretty much the guy that contributed to almost exclusively all the power play goals. So I look at him as a very valuable piece. And unfortunately, whatever sparked that reaction, I think has a lot to do with criticism, has a lot to do with people making stories out of absolutely nothing. And quite frankly, there's a lot of talk about a certain report that came out last season about Voracek. I guess the report was he was laughing when Alain Vigneault was speaking, and that put Voracek, if you recall, on like the bottom 6 of the forward lines. And turns out it was a report that went around, and absolutely nothing was like the real story behind it. It was just kind of an observation. That's what it sounded like, and I think Voracek knew about that, and he sat on that for the better part of a year, and like a calendar year. And the first interaction he had, he's pretty much the most honest person that I've ever encountered in the locker room. So we all got a taste of that on live TV.
It was very interesting because I watched the YouTube video and it was hilarious, but like, come on, you can't say that on live TV.
You can't. Yeah.
But after he did all that, and I saw the report that said AV sought him out, or did Jake Voracek improve his game after that incident?
I think Voracek has been great, before that and after it. So yeah, I mean, I think he's continued his play. As far as that whole interaction, I think it has very little to do with the chip that's on his shoulder, because Voracek always has a chip on his shoulder. That's kind of what makes him have that kind of that attitude, that whole what you saw in that press conference. That's Jake Voracek. I'll go back to a episode, I think, where he was on Spitting Chicklets, and he was just like, yeah, I kind of have this whole fu attitude, and that's for very very paraphrasing what he said. I'm like, yeah, I think that's apparent with that interaction that was on the on TV the other night. But he carries a chip on his shoulder, and a lot of that, I think, is synonymous with the rest of the locker room, because he got this close to a Eastern Conference Finals appearance last year, and everybody just the team's better and they can do it. They can really be a contender. And yeah, Voracek and Giroux are two players who they haven't contended for a cup together.
Yeah, Claude Giroux almost got his cup back in 2010. I'm sorry. You saw Jake Voracek's personality when they did the behind the glass
Right.
episodes, and episode 2 was when they were in the locker room and Jake Voracek got really mad at the teammates. Do you think they have that same fire this season?
Absolutely. I think that fire is actually becoming an inferno, because now they've had real adversity with all these injuries, and it's a 56-game season where you're playing these teams 8 times. I mean, it's already wildly unpredictable as far as, how the standings could finish. It's going to be even tougher because you're playing teams an unprecedented 8 times in the season. So that fire is definitely there. And speaking of fire, I think that's also an example of, Carter Hart showed his frustration last time out in the 6-1 loss to the Bruins, and he broke his stick over the crossbar. Quite frankly,
and that's not his. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And that's not his personality. He like apologized right after. Because I remember, he's that quiet kid. He wants to learn. He was very mature. That's why he sorted out in front of the rookie goaltenders when he came into the league. Like, obviously something is wrong with his game this year. Like, what do you think is going on with his game? What is it?
I think it's more so he's not getting the quality play that he had a year ago from defense, and that has to do with injuries. It has to do with personnel, but it's not all on the defense. There are, there's that quicksand feeling, I feel like, when Carter Hart's in the net, and it's shown this year. I mean, a year ago, there were nights where he was strained by the defense, and he was able to still, make 27 of 29 saves, or 29 of 31, or 30 of 31. Like, he had these great games where it was really Carter Hart, with owed to dinner. But this year, I think it has a little bit to do with the personnel and the injuries on defense because he's taking on a lot. 40 shots from other teams is a lot to take on, and especially when a lot, 6 out of 7 games so far this season, the Flyers have been dominated in their own zone, and their shot differential has been horrible. Last night was the first time all season that the Flyers have shot more, had more shots on goal than their opponent. And unfortunately, for Carter Hart, he's not starting that game. It's Brian Elliott's win. But I think a lot of it just has to kind of do with an entire performance from the team. And, Carter Hart's not necessarily getting bailed out. He needs a little bit of help. And I think that was the growing frustration and what we saw kind of climax at the end of that ruined 6-1 loss. And, honestly, he went to the press conference and he apologized for it. I don't think he should have apologized for it. I think that was, I would be just as frustrated.
Yeah. And I said this last year. I said this part of this year. We can't rely on Carter Hart as much as we did last year, because it affected his game in a huge, huge way. And I'm seeing these games against contenders in our division. I know our division is really, 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 really tough this year. We're seeing with Pittsburgh, we're seeing it with Buffalo, we're seeing it with Boston, with those first lines, and our first lines going against the other first lines in the start of the game, and then the third line is covering the first line. We can't be staying in the defensive zone for 10 seconds, because it's going to cause a problem for Carter Hart. We need to be in there in the zone maybe for 5 seconds, play defense, get out, and then go to our offensive zone. Like the numbers, I want to run you by real quick.
Right.
With the numbers. Last year, Matt Niskanen. I think this year our biggest issue this year is the pace of the game. It's the time on ice. It's the pace. Last year, in the first 7 games of the season, Matt Niskanen had 143 minutes on the ice, and 130 30 shots. I'm sorry, and that makes a huge difference, because against the Penguins, they had the first line in both games had 19 shots and was on the ice for 195 minutes, and then against Buffalo, they had 25 shots, 197 minutes in 2 games against the Flyers, and then Boston had 30 shots in the first line, 192 minutes on the line. I think our biggest issue is the pace. The first line, Ivan Provorov, is affecting his game because there's no one that can play next to him that can lay off that pressure. And what do you think? Which lines do you think are struggling the most this season?
I would say I would agree with you about the top pairings with Provorov and Justin Braun. It caught me by surprise that Braun was on the first line when Myers was healthy. So clearly, when Provorov, he does need a kind of a partner in crime to bail him out, and that's what Niskanen was last year. And through a lot of those games where he was partnered with Braun, he ended up kind of being one of the, not just him, but his pairing was one of the worst defensive, like skaters on the ice. Like they were probably between Provorov and Braun, the two worst skaters for the Flyers, and both big 6-1 losses. Last night, and this is, just kind of looking at like a Corsi percentage of, to kind of give you an idea of, how you fare versus the rest of the skaters on the ice. Provorov was one of the top, I would say, top 7 best skaters for the Flyers. At the bottom of that list was Braun, and Braun was on the 3rd pair. It's becoming more and more apparent that I think a lot of the issue was having the incorrect personnel. So if you want to talk about the lines that were really struggling, it's definitely it was the top line, and whoever Provorov and Braun were on the lines with, whether that had to do with Oscar Lindblom and Travis Konechny, whoever would be on the top lines with Provorov and Braun. It takes a whole unit to kind of sustain the puck in the offensive zone. And you had Konechny, really blow up in one game. We've seen Lindblom put 2 pucks in the back of net this season, but one's an empty goal and one's a deflection off the top of his head. So you're kind of looking at these, 2 players, and you're saying, okay, well, I think if we could sustain the puck in the offensive zone and get some blue line help in that regard, those 2 players their productivity would go through the roof. And it just kind of all, goes back to Provorov needs somebody with him. And in my opinion, Gostisbehere might not be the X factor that a lot of Flyers fans are saying, like, hey, Gostisbehere is going to make a big difference. But Gostisbehere certainly is going to toe the blue line better than what Braun has. And that's a start, especially with, Phil Myers out of the lineup. You kind of really do have to adjust that defensive blue line to sustain the puck and, keep on a forecheck. So really, I think it all does come back down to 2 players that really have kind of brought down their teammates around them was Braun and even Gustafsson this year. But I thought Gustafsson again was more, was going to only really contribute on the power play and not really contribute defensively. And it's kind of, I would love to be proven wrong about that, but it seems to be the case. So yeah, I would say you're looking at even last night, the 3rd pairing. And I think, by the way, Hag had a fine game, but I look at Braun as a struggling defenseman, and I do believe that if I was the GM, right, if I was put myself in Chuck Fletcher's shoes, I wouldn't have re-signed Braun. I thought that was, again, going back to what I said earlier, a little bit of a allergic reaction to Niskanen's retirement. And
do you think it was an impulsive move?
Yes.
Like impulsive move. Yeah, because they were desperate to get help, and I guess they were like, "Hey, Justin Braun, like we're gonna sign you."
He definitely is a veteran defenseman, and he's proven throughout his career that he's a good hand on defense. It's just in the twilight of his career, you need defensemen to be faster, and you need to look to youth to do that. You can't just have this youth who can play but sit on them because you expect more out of Justin Braun. Justin Braun proved that he can do things right, do certain things right, but I think he's works best when his time on ice is limited. And that's why if you're going to put Braun anywhere, a 3rd pair is where he belongs.
Yeah, I think they improved on the power play this year, but they got a little bit slow on defense. In my opinion, the first power play unit has been tremendous. with
Yes.
JVR like up front in the net. Yeah, I if he scores maybe 15 goals this year or maybe 20, by like sitting right in front of the net, that might be too high this season, 20 goals. But if he gets 10 goals up in there, I'm okay with that.
I agree. I think his value is really a part of what happens on the power play. Um, the first power play unit has looked fantastic. And I think a lot of power plays across the league have really been boosted with it because there has been a lack of a preseason and there's only a very abbreviated training camp. So it's if you look at the power play percentages across the board for the league, power plays are eating penalty kill units alive, and that's also apparent by just watching the Flyers. I mean, how many times have you watched a game where a power play goal wasn't scored against the Flyers? I'm pretty sure it might be the Sabres game where no goals were scored against the Flyers. And if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong about this too, I will have to look at the scoring plays and the box score from last night. But I do not recall off the top of my head right now if the New Jersey Devils scored a power play goal last night, but they did score 3 other ones. So
yeah, with the I'll get to the Devils game in a second. But in my opinion, I think they need help with defenseman help. I got a few names that could be familiar to you.
Right.
I got Keith Yandle from Florida. I got Matt Dumba from Minnesota.
Yep.
You got defenseman. And then Vince Dunn from the Blues.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you think the trade value could be for those 3 guys for us?
I think for Matt Dumba, it's very high. He holds an exceptional trade value. I know it's even somebody that the Seattle Kraken is actively, not that the team is actively looking at it, but at Matt Dumba. But when we write for the Kraken, we're like, Matt Dumba is definitely a highlighted player that we're looking at. So when it comes down to the expansion draft, Dumba, I think his value transcends just past Flyers. I think any team would love to have him. I looked at Keith Yandle this year, and there was a brief moment where there was a some trade offers, or not, but like trade talk, that included Keith Yandle, and I think Yandle, if we were able to somehow package and Gustafson and something for Yandle, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I think
what does Florida need to get that deal done?
I think they would want defense in return, but I don't think it would be Gustafson because, again, if you're a coach and you're GM of a franchise, you're going to look at Gustafson and say, okay, but what is the defensive value that he brings to the table? Now, the only way that you're really going to move Gustafson to another team is in the sort of way that the Flyers acted on him, which is we need a power play fix, and Gustafson's good for a power play fix. If you have a stellar cast of defense around you and you can afford to just bring him in as a offensive defenseman and a power play specialist, then he's a great fit. So you would hope that the Panthers look at that kind of value with Gustafson and say, hey, we would love to bring him in. Yes, we would like to package Keith Yandle for Gustafson and, some other pieces. But I don't believe, I think that ship has sailed as far as bringing in Keith Yandle. I think he had an opportunity to do so. And then, Yandle kind of went on an early tear with the Panthers. So his value is a little bit higher than, I think what the Flyers are able to spend or willing to spend. And that's even Yandle at, his age. The Panthers would absolutely be getting youth in return, especially from a team like the Flyers, who are one of the younger in the league.
Do you think they could go for like a guy like Shane Gostisbehere? I saw that they were interested in him. Are they still interested in him?
As far as the interest, I'm not sure as to how high the interest was or how true the interest is in Gostisbehere directly for Yandle. I think that the Flyers should really take another look at what they have with Gostisbehere and how he works with Provorov. And it's been one game, right, against the Devils.
Right.
But look over the next 10 games. And, if he's healthy, if he can get kind of back to what he was in 2017, he's still young enough to make a career renaissance. I would like to hold on to Gostisbehere rather than bring Yandle in. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to disagree with that, and that's fine. But I look at Gostisbehere as, he's on the younger side. He brings a power play presence, and sometimes it's not about, who the outright better defenseman is. Sometimes it's about how they work with other defensemen on the team. And I think that he and Provorov have this kind of partnership where it boosts not only Provorov, but it boosts Gostisbehere. And honestly, the more that, we talk about Gostisbehere and Provorov and that working out, it kind of just brings this giant red flag that bringing in Eric Gustafsson was pretty unnecessary.
I can tell you're a huge Gostisbehere fan.
I do like Gostisbehere. I was, watching him early on. There's so much potential, and then there's injuries. And I was a big believer in players aren't exactly normal. They're not who they were when they recover from an injury. And last season, again, he had another surgery. But when he came back against Boston, the game before, the pause and the pandemic really took over the world, really. While the Flyers were shut out by the Bruins, Gostisbehere played a good game. And I almost specifically watched Gostisbehere that game. And I was like, I need to see what he has because I'm ready. Last season, I was ready to trade the guy. I was very critical of Gostisbehere last year. And I've written a few trade pieces about like, hey, how can we move his contract off of our payroll? And it turns out, probably don't want to move his contract off the payroll. Probably want to keep him around. I will end. I'll defend James Van Riemsdyk in the same way, where it's like, oh, he's just a streaky scorer. Like a lot of people will say that he's just a streaky scorer. He's only really helping out in the power play. And I'm like, my answer to that was, did the puck go in the back of the net? Did the Flyers, gain some sort of value from that?
Right.
Is Van Riemsdyk, he was a top 6 scorer on the team last year. He's a top 4 right now. But I mean, to me, I don't understand where the criticism comes in. Like, yes, he lives on the crease, but a lot of what he does is almost exactly what guys like Wayne Simmons did.
Yeah. And I'm like you said, there's a role on the Flyers teams that players could have more roles than other players, and JVR does a perfect job on the power play, just like Wayne Simmons did here for like 8 seasons. But I'm okay with James Van Reed's like work on the power play because our power play last season was atrocious.
Right.
And it's this season it improved a little bit from last year.
Right.
But this year's defense, and I already gave you my top 3 guys, but tell me, who are your guys? Your defense.
You froze up a little bit there. Hold on. You said defense you gave me, and then you froze up. So I missed it. I missed what you asked.
Okay, sorry. So tell me who your top three defensemen are trading wise if the Flyers decide to trade to get back or trade for a defenseman.
As far as trade value is concerned, and I would never. So it's kind of I'll say something that I don't necessarily believe, but so as far as trade value goes and what you can get for a return for the defensemen that are on the Flyers, clearly that's going to be Ivan Provorov. But also it's like, no, you're not going to trade Ivan Provorov. So, disqualify that from the entire conversation. I think just because he's such a polarizing topic of, being on the trade block at the beginning of the season, I think Gostisbehere still, in no particular order is one of those top three. I would also say Sanheim. Travis Sanheim is a defenseman that offers trade value for the Flyers. I think he's also a defenseman that has a high probability of being protected in the expansion draft. But I think he would be the third, of priority in protection. I think it goes Provorov. I think it goes Myers. I think it goes Sanheim. So okay. Sanheim, I think third in priority there, still has the opportunity to be shopped around if need be. And then I would say if Gostisbehere and Sanheim are players that offer realistically trade value and could be traded from the defense, I think the other defenseman has to be, Myers offers value, but you wouldn't want to trade him. So I would definitely say probably Robert Hagg. Robert Hagg's young enough and he's physical enough where he can, boost another team. Now, any one of those three defensemen, if you wanted to do a defenseman for defenseman swap, which I don't think the Flyers would gain anything from, so I don't think this would be the route to take. I think you would probably put in, one of the lower value defensemen and a forward for a player maybe like Alec Martinez out in Vegas Golden Knights. He's won 2 Stanley Cups before. He's a defenseman that is a defensive defenseman. He's a stay-at-home defenseman. He plays that role first, and I think that was what was severely missed. We've addressed offensive defensemen. We've addressed defensemen that can help on a power play. What we didn't address when Niskanen retired was a stay-at-home defenseman that, transcends the 2 or 3 that you have on the team. I think when you're talking about defense and you have 6 defensemen, more than 50% needs to be a stay-at-home defenseman.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting about a stay-at-home defenseman.
Right.
Let's go to the Devils game. Let's turn this game into a positive. But the Devils game, there were a lot of positives. The Kevin Hayes line was fantastic.
Right.
The Claude Giroux line was fantastic. The defense was up to par. Tell me what I didn't see that you saw improved last night.
First and foremost, it was the forechecking. I was looking at the forechecking before the puck even dropped last night. The first thing I looked for was, okay, what kind of forechecking strategy is this team using? And as soon as they moved away from the 2-1-2 format to, kind of having the defense stay at home, that's when they went up. And that's when they, garnished the lead in the third period. If you're looking at, let's think real quick, the Joel Farabee goal. He got a nice rebound from Scott Lawton's backhand. And that starts from Scott Lawton just being an absolute pest on the forecheck. Forecheck is what really, allowed the Flyers to run away with last night's game. And it started the unraveling of the New Jersey Devils. They started taking bad penalties in the third period. It kept the Flyers and it gave them the game. The Devils, going into the third period, they came out hot in the first 5 minutes. They dictated the pace of the game. And as soon as Claude Giroux shook down, Scott Wedgwood to the ice and just found Nolan Patrick, in the slot, and Nolan Patrick just put that puck home. Once that opened up and the forechecking kind of changed and the Devils started to unravel, you just saw the Flyers, just take advantage of it. And quite frankly, last night's game could have been a runaway of 5-2. I mean, it's still, anytime you score 5 goals, it's sort of a runaway. But they did get a garbage time goal back on us towards the end of the third. It was Pavel Zacha. And I looked at that goal as, okay, there's a running trend this game. All 3 Devils goals have, they scored based on the deflection or just putting, players in front right on top of Brian Elliott. I think defensively, the Flyers looked better last night, but there's still a lot of traffic and congestion that needs to be cleared up, especially late in the game. And it's just about being disruptive in passing lanes and being disruptive in shooting lanes. And I don't think they were as disruptive in shooting lanes last night as they should have been.
Thank you, Eric. This is Snakes Chat on 91.5 WDBK. I'm with Eric Reese. Eric, real quick, where can people find your work on social media?
Oh my God, I'm everywhere. Philly Sports Network, that's our website, PhillySportsNetwork.com. You'll find literally all of our writers and their articles on the front page, just bombarding you. If you want to look at my writing, feel free to follow on Twitter, Eric Reese PSN. That's the same across the board, I believe. I just changed my Instagram name probably, I don't know, months ago to Eric Reese PSN. I think it's been like that for a while now. So anywhere where there's a username, it's Eric Reese PSN. I also believe I'm on Bleacher Report as Eric Reese PSN. So quite frankly, just plug that everywhere and you'll find me. And on Facebook, just Eric Reese. I'll be around in Flyers Nation. That's one of the groups on Facebook that I share my things, share things too. But it's a lot easier to find me on Twitter at Eric Reese PSN and on Instagram at Eric Reese PSN. Also, want to plug in the Kraken Chronicle, KrakenChronicle.com. That's a fan-sided page. We'll be a little bit more active, I think, once the draft gets closer and the Kraken really do have a team. But we're putting out articles there with our small group of writers we have and basically the incubation of that franchise. But yeah, you can find anything that I'm writing. I'm always going to be sharing Eric Reese PSN on Instagram or also on Twitter, probably the best 2 social media platforms.
Eric, thank you for coming on 91.5. My name is Jacob Moriello. I'm from Snakes Chat. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Jacob, for having me, man.